Curtis Crane had spent his entire life mastering control, controlling boardrooms, controlling negotiations, controlling outcomes. But nothing in his perfectly organized world prepared him for the moment Shirley calmly said, in the soft haze of the delivery room, "Well, Viola is my first pregnancy." Curtis froze. Not the polite kind of pause, not the thoughtful kind of silence. This was the jaw-tightening, cup-slipping, heart-thudding kind of freeze that made his mind stop in the middle of breathing. The water glass slipped in his hand, nearly tipping before he caught it with the clumsy reflexes of a man hearing something he never expected. His pupils widened, his breath stalled. Shirley lay propped up against her pillows, exhausted but glowing, cradling baby Viola like the gift she was. She looked peaceful, too peaceful for the storm she had just dropped into the air without realizing it. Curtis blinked once, twice, 3 times. "Hold on," he whispered, the words scraping out of a throat suddenly dry, then louder, not angry, not judgmental, just absolutely stunned. "Shirley, wait, you've never, this was your first?" Shirley's eyebrows lifted slightly. She studied his expression, saw the confusion in his face, and let out a faint breath of realization. Until that moment, she genuinely hadn't known he was unaware. She had assumed the agency told him. She had assumed it didn't matter. But Curtis looked like a man who had just been handed an entirely new chapter of a book he thought he already understood. He leaned back slowly, his eyes moving from Shirley to baby Viola, back to Shirley. The contract, the meetings, the months of careful medical planning, every assumption he'd made about surrogates, motherhood, the process. Gone. His thoughts weren't disorderly, but they were fast. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't part of any plan. "Shirley," he said again, softer this time, as if the words now had weight. "You carried my daughter without ever—" He stopped. He didn't want to sound insensitive. He didn't want to offend her. He just wanted to understand. Shirley nodded, her tone gentle and unembarrassed. "Yes, Viola is my first. I just didn't think it was a big deal." Curtis exhaled, a mix of awe and disbelief settling in, not confusion with edge, just raw surprise, the kind that shifts someone's entire understanding of a moment. Because right there, in that room filled with warm lights and quiet beeping monitors, the truth struck him. A billionaire and a school teacher began this as a simple arrangement. Just logic. Until now. Because the honesty of Shirley's heart, her innocence, her courage, her sincerity, changed the meaning of everything. Have you ever thought you understood someone completely, only to learn something that made you pause and rethink everything? Have you ever realized you were judging a situation with the wrong assumptions? Because that is exactly where Curtis found himself, standing at the doorway between what he expected and what was real. A billionaire and a small-town teacher were supposed to share nothing but a contract, no emotions, no attachments, no surprises. But her truth, unexpected and unintentional, cracked open a new reality neither of them prepared for. Shirley wasn't just the woman who carried his child. She was someone whose strength, character, and honesty challenged everything Curtis believed about who belonged in his world. At that moment, Curtis wasn't thinking about wealth, power, or image. He was thinking about family, trust, and the small baby girl sleeping peacefully between them. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what began as a routine agreement will transform into a journey that reshaped their lives. A journey where one baby girl becomes the bridge between two people from completely different worlds and leads them towards something neither of them expected. Before we go deeper, please like this video, comment to support the channel, and subscribe so YouTube can share more life-changing stories like this with others. Welcome back to Stories by Mr. Flex, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. The delivery room settled into a quiet rhythm again, but Curtis's mind didn't settle with it. He stood there, one hand on the railing of Shirley's hospital bed, the other hovering awkwardly near the cup he nearly dropped earlier. Viola slept soundly in Shirley's arms, unaware that her arrival had just rewritten the emotional contract between the two adults beside her. Curtis tried to gather himself. He prided himself on being measured, composed, and sharp in every environment. He had debated world leaders, pitched billion-dollar concepts, and negotiated contracts that stretched across continents. But this single sentence from Shirley had shaken him in a way nothing from the corporate world ever did. His voice came out gentler this time, not confused anymore, just humbled. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. Shirley blinked, surprised at the question. "I didn't think it mattered that much," she replied. "I just wanted to help someone who wanted a child. Everything else felt personal." Curtis lowered himself into the chair beside her, running a hand across his forehead. "No, I mean, you're right. It's your life, your story. I just never expected that someone would make a choice this big for a complete stranger. Someone they've never even—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Shirley smiled gently. "Curtis, helping someone isn't strange to me. My family raised me that way. People help people. That's how we were taught to live." He looked at her, trying to understand the depth of that simplicity. In his world, favors always came with conditions. Deals always came with percentages. Nothing was ever done without a return on investment. But here was Shirley, a woman who agreed to carry his child without having experienced a pregnancy of her own. A woman who saw life through the lens of compassion rather than contracts. Curtis took a slow breath. "It just makes you even more incredible than I realized." Shirley lowered her gaze, shy but warmed by his sincerity. The room wasn't tense, it wasn't awkward. It felt honest, and perhaps for the first time in Curtis's life, completely unpolished in a way that he welcomed. Viola shifted slightly, letting out a tiny sound, and Curtis instinctively leaned forward. His fingers brushed the baby's hand, small, soft, trusting. That single touch added weight to everything he felt in that moment. This wasn't a transaction. This wasn't a clinical arrangement. This was life, real, messy, unexpected life, and it brought two people together who were never supposed to meet, yet somehow fit into each other's stories perfectly. Curtis cleared his throat. "Shirley," he said gently, "I want you to know something. Nothing about what you just told me changes how grateful I am. Not one thing." She lifted her eyes, meeting his without hesitation. "I didn't do it for gratitude," she said quietly. He nodded, recognizing the truth of that. And for the first time, Curtis felt something shift inside him, a softness he didn't know he needed, a gratitude he didn't know how to express, and a respect for Shirley that grew stronger by the second. This was the moment their lives began to bend toward each other without either of them realizing it, a moment that would define everything that happened next. But before the story continues, let me ask you something, the same question that echoed in Curtis's thoughts. Have you ever stood in a moment that changed the way you saw someone? A moment that forced you to realize that your assumptions were never the full truth, because sometimes the biggest turning points come quietly, wrapped in simple sentences that reveal far more than they appear to. And for Curtis and Shirley, this was only the beginning. The delivery room softened into calm after their exchange, but something new lingered in the space between Shirley and Curtis, a quiet truth neither of them could ignore. The hum of the machines, the faint hallway sounds, and the gentle breaths of baby Viola created a cocoon around them, sealing the moment in time. Curtis leaned back, his posture no longer tense but reflective. He replayed the past 9 months in his mind, every grocery bag he carried into Shirley's house, every phone call to check on her symptoms, every moment he sat beside her in the park as she fought through nausea or fatigue. Somehow, through all of that, he never once thought to ask the question that now stood between them like an unlocked door. He chuckled softly under his breath, shaking his head. "I feel ridiculous," he admitted. "All those months, I never even thought." He stopped, trying to find words that wouldn't intrude or offend. Shirley helped him out. "You assumed I had kids of my own already," she said gently. "Most people do." He nodded. "I didn't mean to assume anything. I just didn't expect such a personal truth to be part of this journey." Shirley let out a small laugh, warm, tired, but sincere. "Curtis, life doesn't always follow the blueprint we think it will." That line stayed with him. It was simple, but it pierced him with surprising clarity. Curtis had lived his life by blueprints, business plans, strategic timelines, contingency charts. Every success he ever earned came from careful planning, calculated risks, and a firm grip on every moving piece. In this tiny room with soft lights and the sound of a newborn sleeping, there were no blueprints, just two people connected by something deeper than paperwork. Curtis exhaled slowly, letting the realization settle. Their worlds weren't supposed to touch, yet they had. And now, despite all logic, they were tied together by a bond not even money could measure. He reached out again, gently adjusting the blanket around Viola, careful not to wake her. His voice was barely above a whisper. "She's perfect," he murmured. Shirley smiled, her expression softening into something he couldn't quite name. "I'm glad she has you," she said. "You wanted her so much." Curtis glanced up, surprised. "We both did." Shirley shook her head lightly. "I wanted to help. You wanted a child. That makes your desire different." He studied her, trying to understand the heart behind her words. Shirley never said anything to impress or gain favor. Everything she spoke came from honesty, shaped by values, family, and the small-town community that raised her. A woman like her didn't enter people's lives to take, she entered to give. Curtis found himself saying, without overthinking it, "You didn't just help me, Shirley. You changed me." Shirley's hand paused where she was adjusting Viola's tiny cap. She didn't speak right away, not out of shyness, but because she understood the weight of what he said. Moments passed before she replied, "We all change each other in some way. Maybe that's why life brings people together." Curtis swallowed hard, because maybe she was right. Maybe people met for reasons deeper than contracts. A knock on the door interrupted them, a nurse arriving to check Viola's vitals. As she worked, Curtis stepped aside, watching Shirley with new eyes. His mind wasn't racing now, it was opening to the idea that he had judged this journey as something transactional, when in truth, it was shaping him in ways he never prepared for. When the nurse left, Curtis looked at Shirley again. She was humming softly to Viola, a tune too faint to place but soothing in a way that touched something tender inside him. And that's when he realized. This story wasn't going to unfold the way he expected. This arrangement was already becoming something more, and the woman he thought he simply hired to carry his child was becoming someone he couldn't stop noticing. Before we step into the full journey of how a billionaire and a small-town teacher became a family shaped by faith, compassion, and unexpected affection, let me remind you, this story is not just about a contract. It's about two people discovering that the heart chooses its connections long before the mind tries to make sense of them. Their journey starts now. Shirley grew up in a small stretch of Oklahoma where the land rolled wide and the people held each other close. In her world, community wasn't just a concept, it was a living force. She remembered waking up on Sunday mornings to the smell of cornbread warming in her grandmother's oven and the soft hum of gospel melodies floating through their home. Her family belonged to a Black Baptist church that sat at the edge of town, its brick exterior worn smooth by decades of summer heat and winter winds. Inside, however, it held the heartbeat of the community. Every Sunday, the choir lifted their voices with the kind of harmony that made strangers close their eyes and feel at home. Shirley learned early that church was more than worship. It was unity. People laughed here, cried here, healed here. This was where meals were shared, stories were passed down, and wisdom was offered like a warm blanket. Her earliest memories included her father, standing tall in his suit, gently guiding her toward the front pew. Her mother, elegant in her Sunday hat, would press a soft kiss to her forehead before stepping into the choir stand. Shirley sat in between them, swinging her legs, absorbing the richness of life unfolding around her. These were the roots that shaped her: faith, community, and the belief that every person had a purpose, even if the world didn't always see it. When she wasn't in church, she was outside running across open fields, catching grasshoppers, or following her cousins to neighborhood gatherings. But nothing topped the Bully Rodeo, a tradition that held a special place in her heart. Every year on Memorial Day, her parents carried on the same ritual passed down through generations. They would dress in their best denim and boots, load a cooler with homemade snacks, and head to Bully before sunrise. The rodeo grounds buzzed with life. Families came from miles away, some from other historic black towns, others from neighboring states. gathering to honor a legacy built by strong, self-made people. Horses kicked up dust as riders showed off skills honed through years of practice. Vendor tables overflowed with crafts, stories, and laughter. Gospel hymns slipped into the air as elders reminisced about the early days when their ancestors fought for opportunities that many took for granted. Shirley would hold her father's hand tightly as they walked through the crowds. He would point to the arena and say, "Baby girl, this isn't just a show. This is history. This is us." Those words stayed with her long after she became an adult. Even as she grew older and took a job teaching elementary school, Shirley carried that heritage in her heart. Teaching wasn't just a career. It was her way of giving back to the community that raised her. Her classroom was filled with bright posters, handwritten affirmations, and children who saw her as more than a teacher. To them, she was a mentor, a listener, a protector, and sometimes even a second mother. Shirley's students adored her because she treated them with gentleness and fairness. When one child struggled with reading, she stayed after school to help. When another came to class without lunch, she quietly placed extra food in his backpack. People like Shirley didn't make headlines, but they made an impact that rippled far beyond what the world could measure. Her life was modest, but it was full of meaning, full of purpose, full of connections that mattered. Meanwhile, in a completely different corner of Oklahoma, Curtis Crane lived a life that could not have been more different from Shirley's. He had grown up in an upscale Tulsa suburb where houses sat behind gates and the word no rarely applied to families of his stature. His father ran a corporate empire, and his mother attended charity boards and exclusive luncheons. From a young age, Curtis was surrounded by polished marble floors, private tutors, and the quiet pressure of being the heir to something enormous. He learned early how to navigate business dinners, shake hands with CEOs, and speak with confidence in rooms filled with people who measured success in profits and power. By the time he turned 25, Curtis was already managing his own investments. At 30, he founded his first tech company. At 36, he appeared on magazine covers, praised for his innovation and sharp instincts. He wore suits tailored to perfection, drove a sleek black sports car, and spoke fluently about algorithms, market shifts, and global partnerships. When he walked into a room, people noticed. When he spoke, they listened. But despite all the noise and admiration surrounding him, Curtis carried a quiet ache. His life was built on achievements, not relationships. His schedule was filled with business flights, not family gatherings. His home held art, not laughter. And while his success earned him respect, it did not bring him the one thing he wanted most, a child. He had tried, first with hope, then with heartbreak, and finally with acceptance. When adoption became complicated and the grief of infertility weighed heavy, he turned to surrogacy. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. It was the result of reflection, the realization that love didn't require biology to be real, but he still longed to see a life carried into the world with intention and care. Curtis researched agencies meticulously. He wanted a process with integrity, transparency, and compassion. What he didn't expect was how emotionally invested he would become the moment he started filling out forms and attending consultations. The desire for a child wasn't business, it wasn't logical, it was personal, deep, and unfamiliar territory for him. 2 lives, 2 worlds, 1 decision. While Curtis pursued surrogacy out of longing, Shirley approached it from a place of service. She had always believed in helping others, in giving where she could. And though she had never been pregnant before, she felt her heart tug toward the idea of carrying a child for someone who desperately needed the chance to be a parent. She didn't tell many people. Some would misunderstand, some might judge, but she prayed on it, talked to her parents, and trusted her heart. She reached out to an agency, completed the medical evaluations, and waited. On the same day Curtis sat in his office staring at the final surrogacy contract with cautious hope, Shirley sat at her kitchen table, signing her name with quiet conviction. 2 intentions, 1 path forming without either of them knowing. Halfway through that journey, as destiny slowly pulled them toward each other, let me remind you, if you're enjoying this story, tap that like button to support the channel. Shirley cleaned her classroom one late afternoon, humming softly to herself, when her phone buzzed with an email notification. Your intended parent match has been confirmed. Meeting scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. She pressed a hand to her chest. It was happening. The next step of her journey was real. Across Oklahoma, Curtis received the same message. He stared at it for a long moment before leaning back in his chair. His life had been filled with calculated moves, but this one felt different. Unpredictable, hopeful. Neither of them knew the other's name yet. Neither knew how important the meeting would be. Neither knew their worlds were about to collide in ways that would reshape them forever. All they knew was this: they were ready. The morning of the meeting arrived with a quiet stillness that seemed to settle over Oklahoma like a soft blanket. Shirley stood in front of her bathroom mirror, smoothing her floral blouse for the third time. She wasn't nervous about the decision she had made. That part she trusted. It was meeting the intended parent that made her stomach flutter. Was he kind? Was he respectful? Would he appreciate what she was offering? She took a slow breath, grabbed her purse, and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of morning dew and the distant sound of birds. She locked her door and walked to her car, whispering a quick prayer that the meeting would unfold smoothly. Across the state, Curtis adjusted his tie in the reflection of his sleek car window. He wasn't usually one for nerves, but this morning felt different. He'd sat through board meetings with billion-dollar stakes, pitched ideas to some of the wealthiest investors in the country, and negotiated contracts with confidence. But today wasn't about money or strategy. Today was about something deeper, a dream he'd held quietly for years. He stepped into the driver's seat and started the engine, the smooth purr of the vehicle doing little to calm the anticipation pressing against his chest. The surrogacy agency sat in a modest 2-story building in Oklahoma City. It was warm, welcoming, nothing like the cold marble lobbies Curtis was used to. He arrived first, greeted by a receptionist with a friendly smile. "Mr. Crane, please have a seat. She'll be here shortly." He thanked her politely and sat, glancing around the room. The walls displayed photos of families, some formed through adoption, others through surrogacy. Babies of every size and shade beamed from those frames. It softened something inside him. Meanwhile, outside in the parking lot, Shirley sat with her hands resting on the steering wheel. She closed her eyes for a moment. "All right, Shirley," she whispered to herself. "Just be yourself." She stepped out, brushed off her jeans, and walked toward the entrance. When she pushed open the door, the receptionist looked up with a warm smile. "Good morning. You must be Shirley. He's already here." Shirley nodded, suddenly aware of her heartbeat, and approached the seating area. Curtis stood up immediately. He wasn't what she expected. She had envisioned someone older, someone stiff, someone who walked like the world owed him something. But the man in front of her carried himself with a calm confidence, polished but not arrogant. He wore a tailored suit with a subtle pattern, and his presence was both composed and surprisingly approachable. "Hi, I'm Curtis Crane," he said, extending his hand. "Shirley Brooks," she replied, shaking his hand gently. Her smile was soft, polite, but real. For a brief moment, they simply observed one another, two strangers from different worlds, meeting for a purpose neither fully understood yet. The agency coordinator arrived soon after, greeting them both before guiding them into a private meeting room. A round table sat in the center, decorated with a small vase of fresh flowers. The atmosphere was intentionally comfortable, designed to lighten what could be an emotional experience. "Thank you both for being here," the coordinator began. "Today we'll walk through legal details, responsibilities, expectations, and provide space for you both to ask questions." Curtis glanced at Shirley respectfully before speaking. "I want to begin by saying thank you. This isn't a small thing you're doing." Shirley shook her head slightly. "Helping someone is never small. I'm just glad to be able to." The coordinator smiled at their exchange before diving into the paperwork. As the discussion progressed, Shirley listened attentively. Her posture remained relaxed, but her eyes showed seriousness. She wasn't just signing a contract. She was committing to something life-changing. Curtis observed her quietly while the coordinator explained medical steps. Shirley's focus didn't waver. She asked thoughtful questions, took notes, and approached everything with sincerity rather than hesitation. Her humility impressed him more than he expected. Most people Curtis encountered looked at him through the lens of wealth. They either wanted something from him or admired him for the wrong reasons. Yet Shirley spoke to him with an even tone, not intimidated, not overly impressed, just balanced. The coordinator slid the final documents toward them. These outline compensation, medical responsibilities, and the expected timeline. When you're both ready, you may sign. Shirley picked up her pen first. Her hand was steady. She wrote her name with quiet confidence, sealing her commitment. Curtis signed right after, his signature bold and certain. With the paperwork complete, the room felt lighter. The coordinator explained the next step, the IVF process. Shirley listened carefully as she learned about hormone injections, appointments, and what the procedure would entail. Curtis leaned forward, wanting to ensure everything was explained clearly and respectfully. He asked questions too, not controlling ones, but thoughtful ones meant to make sure Shirley felt supported. When the meeting ended, they stepped back into the lobby together. There was a small pause, the kind that naturally happens when two people sense they're standing at the beginning of something meaningful, even if neither can name it yet. "Thank you for coming," Shirley said, placing her purse over her shoulder. "Thank you," Curtis replied. "I appreciate you more than you know." Shirley's smile widened just a little. She didn't blush, but her expression warmed. Curtis wasn't sure why he hesitated before speaking again. "Shirley, if there's ever anything you need through this process, anything at all, please let me know." "I will," she said softly. "Thank you." They parted ways, both carrying the beginning of an unexpected connection. Not romantic, not emotional, but respectful. A foundation had formed, steady and gentle. Halfway to her car, Shirley stopped, pressed a hand to her chest, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt ready. Curtis, standing near his vehicle, watched her leave for a moment. He didn't examine the feeling, but he recognized it. Admiration. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying to impress him. But something about her steadiness lingered with him as he drove away. As he reached the intersection, he whispered to himself, "This is going to change my life." And he was right, in ways he couldn't have imagined yet. Before the next chapter unfolds, let me remind you, if you're enjoying this story, tap that like button to support the channel. Their journey had only just begun. The first few weeks after the surrogacy meeting moved gently, like Oklahoma mornings that started cool before warming into bright afternoons. Shirley's days still began with reading circles, hallway greetings, and children tugging on her sleeves, eager to share their newest stories. Her life didn't shift dramatically. She still cooked dinner at her small kitchen table, still visited her parents on the weekends, still attended Sunday service with her usual seat near the front. But something subtle had changed. She now carried the awareness that a new chapter was forming. Doctor visits were scheduled, hormone instructions were sent, and an entire process had begun to take shape. She handled each step with calm responsibility, trusting that if she followed directions carefully, everything would unfold as planned. Curtis approached the beginning of this journey with the focus he devoted to major company milestones, except this one felt more personal than anything sitting on his office desk. He read every update thoroughly, reviewed the medical instructions twice, and even created a separate folder on his phone labeled Baby Crane. It wasn't for show. It wasn't to impress anyone. It was because welcoming a child, even through surrogacy, stirred something tender inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Still, the emotional distance between him and Shirley remained polite, professional, respectful. There was no pressure, no awkwardness, just two adults carrying out a shared mission with dignity, until the IVF process began. Shirley approached the first appointment alone, expecting that was how it would be, independent, quiet, straightforward. She signed in, took a seat, and waited with a book resting on her lap, but a familiar voice reached her before she even opened it. "Shirley?" She looked up. Curtis stood near the doorway, hands tucked into the pockets of a casual jacket, a rare sight for a man who normally dressed like he was walking into a conference. He wasn't wearing a tie today. He wasn't holding a briefcase. His posture was relaxed, but his expression held a seriousness that softened when their eyes met. "Oh," Shirley sat up. "You're here?" "Of course," he said simply, taking the seat beside her. "I told you I wanted to support you through the process." Shirley blinked, surprised by how natural his presence felt. "You didn't have to come." "I know," he replied, But I wanted to. Those 5 words settled between them. Warm, unexpected, genuine. The appointment went smoothly, and they walked together to the parking lot afterward. Nothing dramatic happened, nothing emotional, nothing intimate. But the quiet walk, the shared pace, the natural conversation, it marked the beginning of something new. Over the next 2 months, their interactions increased in small, almost accidental ways. Sometimes Curtis would call after an appointment to ask how she was feeling. Sometimes Shirley would text him updates the doctors gave her. Sometimes he appeared before she expected him, holding herbal teas or vitamin packets. And the most surprising part? These moments never felt forced. One Saturday afternoon, Shirley sat on a park bench waiting for mild nausea to settle, a side effect she'd been warned about. She held a bottle of water and breathed slowly, closing her eyes. Curtis approached from the walking path, spotting her immediately. "You okay?" he asked, lowering himself to the bench beside her. She nodded. "Just a little tired today." Without making a fuss, he reached into a small cloth bag and pulled out a ginger candy pack. "Someone at the office said these help." Shirley laughed softly. "You didn't have to do all that." "It's not trouble," he replied. "Besides, I've been learning more about pregnancy than I ever planned." "Welcome to my world," she said with a grin. That became their rhythm, small gestures that grew naturally. One afternoon, Curtis showed up at her door holding 2 grocery bags. "I wasn't sure what you needed," he said, "so I got a little bit of everything the doctor mentioned." Shirley stepped aside to let him in. "You didn't need to buy out the whole store." He glanced at the bags. "Does it look like I bought out the store?" Shirley raised an eyebrow. "Okay, maybe I did," he admitted with a half smile. They unpacked the items together. Crackers, yogurt, fruit cups, vitamin water, soups, and Shirley couldn't help but laugh at how overloaded her pantry suddenly looked. "You're going to have to help me eat half of this," she teased. "Deal," he replied. It was during one of these casual visits that Shirley tried teaching him how to knead dough for cornbread. The kitchen filled with warm light as she guided his hands gently. No, she corrected with amusement. "You're pressing too hard." Curtis rolled his sleeves up higher. "I'm following instructions. You're fighting the dough. I'm not fighting it. You're absolutely fighting it." They both burst into unexpected laughter, light, pure, releasing. Shirley watched him try again, this time easing his grip. Curtis looked proud of his progress, though the result was still uneven. When they baked it later, the top browned beautifully while the edges leaned toward crunchy. Curtis took a bite, eyed the slice, and declared, "Not my best work." Shirley shook her head, smiling. "But sincere effort earns points." Curtis tapped his fork lightly. "Would sweet potato pie earn more points? Are you offering to make one?" "No," he admitted. "I'm offering to taste one." Shirley playfully nudged him with her elbow. "You're impossible. And yet, here I am," he replied lightly. The sweetness of the moment settled between them, warm enough to soften even the quietest corners of the room. A week later, Shirley brought him a homemade pie, fresh, fragrant, golden. Curtis took one bite, set his fork down dramatically, and said, "This might be the best investment I've ever made." "Investment?" She scoffed with a smile. "This isn't business, Curtis." "It is now," he teased. Their conversations grew easier. Their laughter came quicker. What started as a cautious partnership was becoming a gentle, steady friendship, one built not on obligation but on sincerity. As Shirley's belly grew, Curtis's protectiveness grew too. Not in a controlling way, but in the quiet habits he developed. Calling her on days she had appointments, sending a short message if she missed his update, offering to drive her when he noticed she looked tired. Shirley wasn't naive. She knew men of his world didn't usually operate like this, but she also sensed that Curtis's heart, despite his polished exterior, was honest. Present, learning. She admired that. Then came the milestone moments that stitched them closer. Shirley invited Curtis to her family church one Sunday morning. He accepted immediately, though he didn't know what to expect. When he entered the sanctuary, the energy hit him like a wave, warm, joyful, full. People clapped, voices carried through the space with power, and the music lifted everyone's spirits. Shirley's family welcomed him like a cousin they hadn't seen in years. Plates of food appeared in front of him before he could protest. Her father shook his hand firmly. Children ran around laughing, while elders waved fans and sang along to familiar songs. Curtis wasn't used to gatherings without stiff greetings or formal remarks. Here people hugged him without hesitation. They shared stories, asked about his life, and spoke to him like he was one of their own. He found himself clapping along with the choir, smiling more than he had in months. He wasn't performing. He wasn't networking. He was simply present. A week later, Curtis invited Shirley to a formal charity event in Tulsa. She wasn't sure she belonged in that space, but Curtis assured her otherwise. She wore a simple, elegant dress. Nothing extravagant, nothing loud. But when she stepped into the grand hall, heads turned. Not because she was flashy, but because she carried herself with quiet dignity that stood out among gowns glittering under chandeliers. Colleagues approached Curtis with curious glances. Some assumed Shirley was a business associate. Others assumed she was a guest. None guessed the truth. When Curtis introduced her as the woman carrying his child, his voice held pride, not embarrassment, not hesitation, just sincere appreciation. Shirley observed the world he lived in, the polished speeches, the silent bids on artwork, the careful conversations thick with coded language. It was a completely different universe from hers, but she handled it with grace. Later that night, when they stepped outside into the calm air, Curtis walked beside her. "Your world is fascinating," she said quietly. "So is yours," he replied. They didn't say anything more, but the silence felt comfortable. Their two worlds, different in every possible way, had begun to weave naturally, without forcing it, without naming it. Something gentle was forming. Shirley didn't plan to invite Curtis to church again so soon. Their first visit together had been casual, a gentle introduction to her world. She assumed he might appreciate the experience, enjoy the music, and leave it at that. But when Sunday morning arrived and she stepped out of her car onto the gravel parking lot, she caught herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting him to show up. She shook her head at the thought. Curtis was a billionaire with a full schedule, meetings, projects, responsibilities. Surely he had other obligations. She didn't want to assume anything, least of all that he would rearrange his life just to be present in hers. But then she heard a familiar engine behind her. She turned. The sleek black car eased into a space. Curtis stepped out wearing a simple button-down shirt, dark slacks, and a calm expression. He lifted a hand in greeting as if this were the most natural place in the world for him to be. "Morning," he said, walking toward her. Shirley tried not to look surprised. "Curtis, you came?" "I told you I wanted to understand your world," he replied. Besides, I enjoyed the first visit. There was no humor in his tone, no teasing, no polite courtesy. He meant every word, and somehow that meant more to Shirley than she expected. They walked toward the church entrance. Shirley's steps were steady, but Curtis felt a new awareness around her, as if he wasn't just attending a service but stepping deeper into the foundation of her life. Inside, the sanctuary buzzed with warm greetings. Members of the congregation approached Shirley immediately. "Good morning, baby." "Hey now, look at you glowing." "Come on in, Sister Brooks." Curtis stayed by her side, offering polite smiles and nods as people welcomed him again with open arms. A few remembered him from the previous week. "Well, look who came back," one of the elders said with a chuckle. "That means you enjoyed us." "I did," Curtis replied with quiet sincerity. "Thank you for having me." The elder clapped him on the shoulder with a friendliness Curtis wasn't used to, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt genuine. They took their seats near the middle, close enough to feel the movement of the choir, but far enough that Curtis didn't feel overwhelmed. Shirley stood when the service began, and he followed. The choir opened with a soulful hymn, harmonies rising to the rafters. Curtis felt the sound in his chest, not just his ears. He glanced at Shirley. Her eyes were closed, her shoulders relaxed, her spirit completely at peace. He admired that. He admired her. As the sermon began, the pastor spoke about purpose, service, and the unpredictable ways people enter our lives. Sometimes, the pastor said, God places someone in your path to teach you something new, to broaden your understanding, to remind you that life is bigger than the plans you set. Shirley's eyes opened, and for a brief moment, her gaze drifted toward Curtis. He felt it, and he wondered, was this message for him? When the choir stood again, the congregation rose to clap along. Curtis did his best to follow the rhythm. Shirley laughed softly when she noticed his hand slightly off beat, but there was no judgment, just warmth. After service ended, people gathered outside under the warm Oklahoma sun. Children ran between cars, elders discussed the sermon, and small groups formed naturally. Shirley moved effortlessly through the familiar setting, but Curtis stayed close, observing everything with quiet interest. Her father approached first. "Good to see you again, Curtis," he said, shaking his hand firmly. "You settling in with our group?" Curtis nodded. "It's different from what I'm used to, but I mean that in a good way." Shirley's father laughed. "Most folks do." Others stopped by to greet them. One of the choir members handed Shirley a small plate of homemade pound cake. Without hesitation, Shirley cut a piece and offered half to Curtis. He blinked. "You're sharing? Don't make it weird," she teased. "Just take it." He did. And the taste made him pause. "That's incredible. Told you." As more people came by, Curtis found himself relaxing. He wasn't being evaluated. He wasn't being admired for his wealth or accomplishments. Nobody asked him about his company, his money, or his reputation. They just welcomed him, fully, openly, without calculation. It was disarming in the best way. After the crowd began to thin, Shirley walked with him toward their cars. "You handled that well," she said lightly. "Handled?" Curtis raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like survival training." "In some ways it is," she joked. "My family doesn't know the meaning of quiet." "I liked it," he admitted. Shirley glanced at him, trying to determine if he was simply being polite, but his expression was sincere. "I mean it," he added. "Your world feels grounded." She smiled faintly. "That's one way to describe it." Curtis rested his hand lightly on the roof of his car. "Shirley, today showed me something." "What's that?" "That there are things money can't buy. Atmosphere, connection, people who greet you because they care, not because they want anything in return." Shirley's expression softened. "That's how we were raised." "I envy it," he said quietly. She blinked at the vulnerability in his tone. Rare, honest, unpolished. It wasn't the voice of a billionaire CEO. It was the voice of a man seeing something he'd never experienced. And something shifted then. Not a romantic spark, not yet, but a moment of genuine understanding. "Thank you," Curtis said, "for letting me be part of it." "You're welcome," Shirley replied. "You're family now, at least in this part of our journey." Her words lingered with him long after they parted ways. Later that evening, Curtis sat on his porch at home. He looked out at the manicured lawn, the quiet gated street, the perfect symmetry of the homes around him. Everything was neat, predictable, controlled, but his thoughts drifted back to the church, the joyful noise, the laughter, the pride in people's eyes when they spoke about their heritage. He pictured Shirley's smile as she shared cake with him, the way her father clasped his shoulder, the simplicity of community that made him feel something he couldn't quite name. For the first time in a long while, Curtis saw clearly. Love wasn't just romance. Family wasn't just biology. Connection wasn't something you could measure in dollars. Shirley's world had shown him something he didn't realize he'd been missing. And this was only the beginning. The invitation arrived in Shirley's inbox late on a Tuesday evening. She had just finished grading spelling tests at her dining table when her phone buzzed with an email from Curtis. The subject line read, "If you're available this weekend." She clicked it open, expecting a simple medical update or scheduling request. Instead, she found a neatly worded explanation of an annual charity gala he was attending in Tulsa, a major event that raised funds for local youth programs. He mentioned that he was one of the keynote supporters, and the agency had encouraged intended parents to maintain open communication and mutual respect during the process. But what caught her attention wasn't the event itself. It was the final line of the message. "If you would feel comfortable attending as my guest, I would be honored to have you there." Shirley stared at the screen for a moment, surprised. It wasn't inappropriate. Curtis had always been respectful, professional, considerate, but she hadn't expected him to want her beside him at such a formal gathering. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, and she wasn't sure she belonged in his. She typed a reply, deleted it, tried again, deleted that one too. Finally, she composed a simple response. "Thank you. I appreciate the invitation, I'll think about it. When Curtis received her message, he smiled. He understood hesitation. He expected it. But he hoped she would come. Not because he needed a date or a prop for a charity photo, but because he genuinely wanted her included in the spaces that meant something to him now. 3 days later, Shirley found herself standing in front of her closet, debating what to wear. Every outfit felt the same, simple, modest, nothing like the gowns she imagined women wore to billionaire charity events. She tried on a dark blue dress that she'd worn to church anniversaries and family weddings. It fit well. It was neat. It was enough. She stood in the mirror, smoothing the fabric over her growing baby bump. "You're overthinking," she whispered to her reflection. "Just go. It's one night." She grabbed her purse and stepped outside. Curtis waited in the hotel lobby where guests were gathering before the event. The space buzzed with polished conversations and perfume that clung to the evening air. Women in elegant dresses glided across the marble floor, while men in sharp suits stood in clusters discussing investments and philanthropy. Curtis checked his watch, then looked toward the entrance. When he saw Shirley walk in, he straightened. She looked beautiful, not flashy, not extravagant, but poised. The navy dress complemented her complexion, and her natural grace drew the eye more than any outfit could. Shirley hesitated near the doorway, glancing around with uncertainty. Curtis stepped forward immediately. "Shirley," he greeted warmly, "you look incredible." Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you. I wasn't sure what people wear to these things." "You're perfect," he assured her. The sincerity in his tone surprised her, and the moment softened the tension in her shoulders. He extended an arm in a polite gesture. "Shall we?" She nodded, gently resting her hand near his elbow as he led her into the main ballroom. The gala was unlike anything Shirley had ever seen. A massive chandelier cast a warm glow across the room. Tables were draped in fine linen, adorned with crystal centerpieces. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved effortlessly between guests, offering trays of appetizers she didn't recognize. Conversations bounced around her. Discussions about business acquisitions, art donors, travel schedules, and fundraising targets. The atmosphere was refined, polished, and steeped in quiet competition. Curtis noticed the way Shirley's eyes widened slightly, the way she held her purse a little tighter. He leaned in just enough for her to hear him over the hum of voices. "If it feels overwhelming," he murmured, "just stay close. I won't disappear." She nodded, grateful for the reassurance. A few guests approached them almost immediately. "Curtis, good to see you," one man greeted. "And who's your lovely guest?" Curtis responded without hesitation. "This is Shirley," he said proudly. "She's carrying my daughter." Shirley felt her breath hitch. He said it with such ease, such respect, such acknowledgement that she didn't feel like an accessory. She didn't feel like a footnote. She felt recognized. "Oh," the woman beside him exclaimed. "That's wonderful. Congratulations to both of you." Shirley smiled politely. Curtis thanked them graciously. As they moved through the room, more greetings followed. Some were curious, some were impressed, some were startled but quickly warmed by Curtis's confident introduction. Not once did he falter, not once did he reduce her role, not once did he speak of her as anything less than central to the journey of becoming a father. Shirley took it in quietly. Curtis stood tall beside her, not performative, not dramatic, just present. Whenever someone asked a question that felt too personal, he gently redirected the conversation to safer ground. When she seemed uncomfortable, he offered her a calm look that seemed to say, "I'm here." During dinner, he leaned toward her between courses. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. "Good," she replied, "just taking it all in." Curtis followed her gaze as she observed the long tables filled with donors, executives, and public figures. "These events are a bit stiff," he admitted. "People dress up and talk about helping others, but half the time they're thinking about business, or social standing, or publicity." Shirley turned to him. "Then why come?" "Because the programs we support matter, and because I want to lead by example. If I show up, others follow. More support means more kids get opportunities." Shirley considered this. "So you give where it counts?" Curtis smiled faintly. "I try. It was the first moment she saw past the polished billionaire exterior and glimpsed the man underneath, the one who cared, who was thoughtful, who didn't flaunt his generosity for attention. The program presentations began shortly after. While speakers took the stage, Shirley listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Curtis. The blue light reflecting off the stage illuminated his profile. His eyes softened whenever children's success stories were mentioned. His posture shifted slightly when photos of community programs appeared on screen. It was clear that his involvement wasn't performative. He connected with these causes. Near the end of the program, one of the organizers spotted Curtis at his table. "Curtis, could you come up for a moment?" Shirley watched as he crossed the ballroom. He shook hands with donors, exchanged polite nods, and spoke briefly about the importance of supporting educational opportunities for youth. His voice carried confidence and warmth, but not arrogance. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was speaking from a place of genuine commitment. When he returned to the table, Shirley met his eyes. "You're good at that," she said softly. "Public speaking?" "Being real," she clarified. For the first time that evening, Curtis looked genuinely taken aback, not in shock, not embarrassed, just quietly moved. "No one ever puts it that way," he murmured. "Well," she replied, "maybe they're not looking closely." Their eyes held for a moment, steady, calm, filled with something unspoken. Not romance, not longing, but respect so deep it carried a quiet power. After the program ended, guests mingled again. Soft music filled the ballroom, and small groups formed near the bar and dessert stations. Curtis guided Shirley toward a quieter corner, where they could talk without being approached constantly. "You handled yourself beautifully tonight," he told her. She shook her head. "I felt out of place." "You didn't seem out of place," he countered. "You held your own." Shirley glanced around, at the sparkling gowns, the polished shoes, the perfectly styled hair, then back at her simple dress. "I don't think I shine the way these women do," she said honestly. Curtis studied her for a long moment, then answered in a voice that carried no exaggeration. "You shine differently." Shirley felt her breath catch. He continued, "And sometimes that's the kind of shine people notice most." He didn't push the moment further. He didn't let it linger into something awkward or suggestive. He simply offered the truth and allowed it to rest gently between them. When they finally stepped outside, the night air felt fresh against Shirley's skin. She took a slow inhale, letting the cool breeze settle her nerves. Curtis walked her to her car. There was no rush, no abrupt ending, just a natural closing to an evening that had offered them both clarity. Before she opened her door, Shirley looked at him with steady eyes. "Thank you for inviting me. It meant a lot." Curtis nodded. "Thank you for coming. You made the night feel real." There it was again, the sincerity that kept catching her off guard. "Good night, Curtis. Good night, Shirley. Get home safe." She sat in her car and closed the door. For a moment she didn't start the engine. She just sat there, reflecting. Tonight hadn't been romantic. It had simply shown her something. Curtis Crane, billionaire, public figure, polished CEO, was learning how to be human in spaces that usually demanded masks. And she, a schoolteacher from rural Oklahoma, had helped him see himself more clearly without trying to. Something soft had settled between them, admiration, respect, and the early formation of trust. The kind of trust that becomes a foundation long before love ever enters the room. The months that followed the gala brought a steady, quiet transformation to Shirley and Curtis's relationship. Not a sudden shift, not a dramatic reveal, but a natural unfolding that felt as gentle as Oklahoma wind moving through tall grass. Their lives did not merge instantly, yet they began drifting into each other's worlds with ease, learning the rhythms of shared responsibility, shared anticipation, and shared humanity. Shirley's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Her belly rounded more with each passing week, and Curtis found himself thinking about her and about the baby during moments he didn't expect. During board meetings, he would catch himself wondering if she'd eaten. On late-night flights, he would pause mid-email draft and check his phone for updates. Even the smallest things triggered concern. A shift in weather, a headline about flu season, a mention of prenatal care on the radio. He never wanted to overstep. He never demanded anything. But he cared, deeply, quietly, consistently, and Shirley felt that. Their bond didn't grow because of grand gestures. It grew because of the small things. On a chilly morning in late fall, Shirley arrived at her prenatal appointment carrying a scarf her mother knitted for her. She signed in and took a seat in the waiting area. She wasn't expecting Curtis to show up. He had a major investor presentation that morning, but she didn't mind. They had reached a comfortable balance. He came when he could, and when he couldn't, he checked on her later. But as she walked from the front desk to the chairs, she heard a familiar voice. "Shirley, over here." Curtis sat in the far corner, closing a laptop and sliding it into his bag. Her eyebrows lifted. "I thought you had a presentation." "I did," he replied, standing. "I delivered it early. You came all the way out here afterward. I wasn't going to miss this appointment." Shirley shook her head, smiling softly. "You didn't have to rush." "I didn't rush," he said. "I planned." It wasn't bragging. He simply meant it. They followed the nurse inside, and the checkup went smoothly. The doctor placed the Doppler monitor against Shirley's belly, and the room filled with the rhythmic thump of baby Viola's heartbeat. Curtis froze, not with shock this time, but with awe. This sound rooted him in a way nothing ever had. He glanced at Shirley, who watched him with gentle understanding. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Curtis nodded, eyes still fixed on the machine. "That's my daughter." Shirley smiled. "Yes, she's strong." The doctor continued explaining growth milestones, and Curtis listened intently, absorbing every detail as if preparing for the most important project of his life. When the appointment ended, they walked outside together. "You're very involved," Shirley said as they reached their cars. Curtis looked at her with calm sincerity. "I want to be—" Shirley paused, touched by his honesty. "Viola's lucky." Curtis opened his car door, then stopped, leaning slightly toward her. "No, I'm the lucky one." The word surprised both of them, not romantic, just deeply true. As her third trimester neared, Shirley found herself tiring more easily. Her feet ached, her back tightened, and she began adjusting her schedule to accommodate the changes. She didn't complain. She rarely did, but Curtis noticed. One evening, he stopped by her house with a bag of groceries. She had been preparing to cook dinner when she opened the door and saw him holding 3 fully packed paper bags. "Curtis, what is all this?" "Dinner," he said simply. "You cooked?" "No," he admitted with a small smile, "but I bought ingredients, and I can follow directions, mostly." Shirley stepped aside, laughing. "Come in before you drop something." They unpacked the groceries in her kitchen: vegetables, chicken, spices, a loaf of bread from a local bakery, and a dessert she immediately recognized. "You bought sweet potato pie again?" she asked with amused disbelief. "It felt necessary," he said. They cooked together, but this time Curtis took the lead. He followed the recipe card Shirley taped to her fridge, measuring spices carefully, asking questions when he wasn't sure. Shirley sat on a stool, watching him navigate her small kitchen with a focus that felt oddly endearing. "You know," she said, "you don't have to do all this." Curtis stirred the pot gently before answering. "I know, but I like being here." She didn't respond aloud, but her heart softened. Dinner came out surprisingly well, flavorful, balanced, warm. They ate at her kitchen table where sunlight still clung to the edges of the curtains. Their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about books she used in her classroom. He told her about a charity project he hoped to expand. They discussed parenting philosophies, not because they'd planned to, but because the topic naturally surfaced. Curtis listened to Shirley speak about raising children with love, patience, and accountability. Her passion for nurturing young minds wasn't just knowledge, it was conviction. Curtis admired that deeply, and Shirley valued the way Curtis talked about giving children opportunities he'd seen denied in certain communities. His heart wasn't hard, it was simply guarded, but she could see the softness breaking through more each week. After dinner, Curtis washed the dishes despite Shirley insisting she could handle it. "No," he said gently. "You're carrying my daughter. I can wash a few plates." His tone wasn't possessive. It was protective, respectful, grateful. Shirley watched him for a long moment, the realization settling in more clearly than ever. Curtis wasn't participating out of obligation. He was choosing to show up. As her belly grew, so did their conversations. One afternoon, Shirley sat on her porch sipping a glass of ice water while Curtis sat across from her, jacket off, sleeves rolled halfway up. "Can I ask you something?" she said, rocking gently in her chair. "Anything. Do you ever get tired of being in rooms where everyone expects something from you?" Curtis leaned back, contemplating. Every day, he admitted. People want deals, opportunities, influence. It's never simple. "And with me?" she asked carefully. "You're the one person who doesn't want anything from me," he replied. "Except maybe for me to listen." Shirley smiled. "That's true." "You know what's strange?" Curtis added, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. "Whenever I'm here, I feel normal. Normal is underrated," she teased. "Maybe," he said, "but I like it." Their conversations grew deeper as the months passed. Curtis shared stories he rarely told anyone, memories of lonely holidays in large houses, moments where his successes felt empty, regrets about not prioritizing relationships sooner. Shirley wasn't a therapist, but her presence made him feel safe speaking freely. She offered insight without judgment. "You're learning," she said once, "and learning is a strength." Curtis looked at her with genuine appreciation. "You make everything sound simple." "It is simple," she replied. "People complicate what doesn't need to be complicated." Curtis smiled. "You're good for me, Shirley." Shirley didn't know how to respond. She wasn't looking for praise, but his words softened something inside her. As the third trimester approached, Curtis found himself imagining the future more vividly, not in the abstract way he had before, but in specifics. He pictured Viola taking her first steps in his living room. He pictured her standing in his office, handing him a crayon drawing during a virtual meeting. He pictured her sitting on Shirley's lap during Sunday services. He pictured holidays where Shirley's family welcomed them both, where laughter filled the room instead of formal speeches. And each time he imagined these things, Shirley was always part of the picture. Not as an accessory, not as a temporary presence, not as a background character in his life story, but as someone central. Someone constant, someone who made the idea of family feel warm instead of intimidating. He wasn't sure when the shift had happened. He only knew that it was real, and it scared him as much as it comforted him. It was late evening when Shirley felt the first ripple of discomfort. She was sitting in her living room, folding small baby clothes Curtis had bought earlier that week, when a sharp tightening spread across her abdomen. She sucked in a breath. "Oh, that's new." She waited a moment. The sensation faded. She stood and tried walking, assuming it was just the baby shifting. But 10 minutes later, the tightening returned. Stronger, deeper, unmistakable. She reached for her phone with steady hands. "Curtis," she said when he answered. His voice was alert immediately. "Shirley, what's wrong?" Curtis grabbed his keys so quickly he didn't remember putting on his shoes. "I'm on my way. Stay on the phone with me." Shirley breathed slowly, one hand braced on the counter. "It's early, but it feels real." Curtis's voice was controlled but firm. "I'm almost there." The soft fabric she had been folding slipped from her lap onto the floor. Breath after breath, realization settled. It was time. Viola was ready. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same after tonight. The night air outside Oklahoma City Hospital carried a quiet intensity, the kind that settles before life changes forever. Curtis pulled up to the emergency entrance with a sense of urgency pounding through his veins. He had driven quickly, but carefully, repeating to himself that Shirley needed him steady, not frantic. His car had barely rolled to a stop before he was out and hurrying toward the sliding doors. Shirley was already inside, gripping the armrest of a wheelchair as a nurse guided her toward triage. Her face was tight with concentration, but her voice was calm. "Curtis, you made it. Of course I'm here," he said, coming to her side immediately. His hand hovered near her shoulder, not touching yet, waiting for her cue. Shirley's eyes softened. "I knew you would be." Another contraction hit, and she closed her eyes, breathing deeply as the nurse wheeled her forward. Curtis walked beside her, matching her pace. "Is she close?" he asked. "She's on her way," Shirley murmured, exhaling slowly. "That much I know." They were guided into a private room, machines humming quietly in the background. The nurse checked Shirley's vitals, adjusted the monitors, and reassured her gently. "You're doing great. We'll call the doctor. Just keep breathing." Curtis stood near the bed, hands clasped together, trying to look composed, but inside he felt like every nerve was firing at once. His world had always been structured: spreadsheets, schedules, contracts, calculated risks. But nothing prepared him for this. Shirley sensed the tension radiating from him even through her own pain. "You're the one panicking," she whispered with a small smile. Curtis blinked. "I'm not." Another contraction cut him off, and Shirley gripped the rail. The nurse encouraged her through it, and as the pain eased, Shirley turned her head toward Curtis again. "You are definitely panicking," she said, breathless but amused. He let out a laugh he didn't expect, shaky but real. "I've never done this before." "Neither have I," she reminded him. He froze. The truth hit him again. She was walking into this moment without any past experience to guide her, and she was still calmer than he was. "Shirley," he said quietly, "you're incredible." She didn't answer, just breathed through another wave. Time moved strangely after that, fast and slow all at once. Nurses entered, repositioned, monitors, checked progress, and readied the room. Curtis stayed at Shirley's side, helping when she asked, stepping back when she needed space. He held a cold cloth to her forehead at one point. She thanked him softly. He helped adjust her pillow. She nodded gratefully. Whenever fear crept into his eyes, Shirley steadied him with a look, not a loud reassurance, just quiet confidence. "You're doing great," he whispered once. "You say that like I have a choice," she replied through clenched teeth, but her humor never left her. Even now, in the middle of the most intense moment of her life, she stayed grounded. The doctor eventually stepped in. "All right, Shirley, it's time." Curtis felt his breath catch. Shirley squeezed the rails, nodding with determination. Everything that followed was a blur of instructions, deep breathing, and controlled strength. Curtis stayed near her shoulder, voice low but steady. "You're doing amazing. I'm right here. She's almost here." Shirley focused, her expression fierce and calm all at once. And then, in a moment that stole the breath from the room, a new sound pierced the air, a sharp, beautiful cry. The doctor lifted a tiny pink, wriggling baby into view. "Here she is," the doctor announced. "A healthy little girl." Curtis's knees almost buckled. Shirley sank back onto the bed, tears sliding down her temples as relief washed over her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but her eyes shone with awe. The nurse gently placed the baby on Shirley's chest. The warmth of that tiny body seemed to fill the entire room. Shirley touched Viola's cheek with trembling fingers, her emotions too full to speak. Curtis stepped closer, slowly, carefully, eyes wide, breath shallow. "Oh my God," he whispered. Viola blinked her new eyes, her little fingers curling. Curtis stared at her as if witnessing a miracle unfold in real time. "She's beautiful," Shirley murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Curtis nodded, unable to tear his gaze away. She's perfect." Shirley smiled, her tired expression glowing. "Say hello to your daddy, Viola." The words sank into Curtis with unexpected force, and he covered his mouth with one hand. His eyes stung, his throat tightened, emotions he hadn't felt in years breaking through the surface. Shirley offered him a tiny nod. "You can hold her. I don't want to do anything wrong," he breathed. "You won't," she whispered. A nurse guided his hands, and Curtis lifted his daughter for the first time. Viola rested against his chest, tiny, warm, fragile. Curtis exhaled shakily, overwhelmed. "Hi, sweetheart," he murmured. "I'm your dad." Shirley watched the scene unfold. The billionaire who always carried himself with structured control now standing there with tears glistening on his cheeks, utterly undone by the tiny life in his arms. It was intimate, gentle, a moment that felt almost sacred. Curtis turned to Shirley, voice rough with emotion. Thank you for giving her life." Shirley shook her head softly. "I carried her, but she belongs to both of us." Their eyes held, not romantically, not yet, but with a depth neither had expected. It wasn't a business arrangement anymore. It wasn't a contractual moment. It was family, standing at the edge of something vast and new. As the nurses finished their tasks, the atmosphere settled into a calming stillness. Curtis sat in a chair beside the bed, holding Viola, while Shirley lay back watching them both. He couldn't stop studying the baby's delicate features, her small nose, tiny fingers, soft cheeks. "She's so small," he whispered. Shirley smiled. "She'll grow fast." He looked up at her. "Thank you again for trusting me in this process." Shirley's eyes softened. "I trusted the purpose, and I trusted your intention." The honesty between them deepened the moment. There was no nervousness, no awkwardness, just truth. Shirley sighed comfortably, exhaustion settling into her bones. Curtis watched her with a kind of protectiveness he didn't fully understand yet. "Get some rest," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, eyes fluttering closed, comforted by his presence. As Shirley drifted into sleep and Viola rested in his arms, Curtis felt something shift permanently inside him. This was no longer just the end of a surrogacy journey. This was the beginning of something neither of them would ever be able to walk away from. The hospital room was dim, lit by a soft glow from the small lamp near Shirley's bed. Viola slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her mother, swaddled in a light blanket. Her tiny breaths created a rhythm that steadied the room, bringing a sense of calm after the intensity of birth. Shirley rested against her pillows, exhausted but content. Curtis sat nearby, elbows on his knees, watching his daughter with awe that refused to fade. Every few minutes he leaned closer to get a better look at her. Every detail captivated him. The tiny wrinkles in her fingers, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the faint newborn sounds she made. He still couldn't believe she was real. Shirley glanced at him, noticing the way he kept shaking his head slightly, as if trying to process something too big for his mind to hold. "You look like a man who just inherited the whole world," she whispered. Curtis chuckled softly. "I think I did." Silence settled again, warm, peaceful. A nurse entered quietly, checking Shirley's vitals and making a few notes. When she left, Shirley shifted slightly, adjusting her pillow. Curtis stood. "Do you need anything? Water? A different pillow?" "I'm okay," she murmured. "Just a little sore. That's normal," he said gently. "You were incredible." Shirley smiled. "Thank you." After a moment she spoke again, casually, without any build-up, as if mentioning something ordinary. "You know, this being my first pregnancy, I wasn't sure what to expect." Curtis froze. The words didn't fully land at first. He blinked once, twice, slowly turned his head toward her. Shirley looked at him, confused by his sudden stillness. "My first pregnancy," Curtis straightened abruptly, his hands hovering awkwardly at his sides. "First pregnancy?" he repeated, voice cracking on the second word. Shirley nodded, unfazed. "Yes." There was a long, heavy pause. Curtis stared at her, then blinked again, then stared harder. "You mean," his voice pitched upward, "you mean like your first? As in the very first? As in you've never—" Shirley's brows lifted. "Curtis, I thought you knew." "Knew what? That I've never been pregnant before?" Curtis opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Nothing came out. His entire face went into a slow-motion expression of realization. The widening eyes, the raised brows, the slight backward lean, the parted lips. He looked like a man who had just been hit with a plot twist he didn't order. "Wait, Shirley." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly thrown. "Hold on. You mean to tell me you carried my daughter as your first pregnancy, your first everything?" "Yes," she said plainly. Curtis blinked so dramatically that Shirley almost laughed. Why didn't you say anything?" he stammered. "I didn't think it mattered." "Mattered," Curtis squeaked. "Shirley, that's like someone saying, 'By the way, this is my first day driving,' after they already drove across the country." Shirley burst into soft laughter. "Curtis, I'm fine. The baby is fine. Everything went well. That's not the point. Surrogates are usually—" He waved his hands in a helpless circle. They almost always have. "Had children before?" she offered. "Yes!" Curtis exclaimed, relieved she finished the sentence for him. "Exactly. Yes. That—" Shirley shrugged gently. "The agency said it was rare, but possible if everything medically checked out." "Rare," Curtis repeated. Surely rare is spotting a shooting star. This is, he gestured at her. This is next level unexpected. His flustered panic only made Shirley laugh harder. She covered her mouth to muffle the sound, not wanting to wake Viola. Curtis shook his head, still stunned. I had no idea. No idea. Zero. None. Well, she said lightly, now you do. Curtis dropped back into his chair, staring at her the way a man might stare at a miracle he hadn't realized he just witnessed. You went through pregnancy, labor, delivery, everything, without having any idea what it would feel like. His voice was softer now, less shocked, more reverent. And you still chose to do it for me. Shirley looked down at her hands, modestly brushing off the significance. I wanted to help someone who wanted a family. Curtis leaned forward, elbows on his knees again. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you carried my daughter, without any personal experience, without ever having been through anything like this, and you handled it like someone who'd done it 3 times already. Shirley's smile deepened. I had good support. Curtis stared at her for a long moment. The comedic shock faded. What replaced it was something deeper, something heavier, something heartfelt. I don't know what I expected, he admitted softly, but I never imagined someone doing something this big, this life-changing, without having gone through it before. That takes courage. More courage than I've probably ever had. Shirley shifted, a little embarrassed, but she didn't look away. I did what I felt was right, and you did it flawlessly, he said. Shirley met his gaze, vulnerable, open, sincere. Curtis inhaled slowly. I'm sorry, he said after a moment, if I reacted badly. I didn't mean to sound judgmental. You weren't, she assured him. Just surprised. Surprised, he repeated, laughing under his breath. Surely, surprised is when someone tells you they changed the dinner menu. This was something else. They shared a smile, one filled with warmth and something unspoken. Curtis leaned back, looking at Viola again. She's here, he whispered. She's healthy. She's perfect. And you gave her life. Shirley exhaled, letting the truth of the moment settle. Curtis stood slowly and walked toward her bedside. He reached out, carefully, respectfully, and rested his hand over hers. Thank you, he said, for trusting me, for doing something so selfless, for being stronger than I ever understood. Shirley's eyes softened, warm and steady. You're welcome, Curtis. There was a quiet pause, not awkward, not uncertain, simply full of understanding. Curtis looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, not polished, not controlled, human. You know, he murmured, this changes how I see you. Shirley tilted her head. How so? You're not just the woman who carried my child, he said. You're someone extraordinary. Her breath caught, just a little. Curtis continued, voice low and honest. And I think this is the moment I realize I'll never forget what you've done for me. The words hung between them, tender, quiet, meaningful. A new current flowed through the room. This was the moment everything shifted. Not romance yet, but something close, something warm, something impossible to ignore. Curtis looked at her one more time, the corners of his lips lifting. I swear, Shirley, you're full of surprises. She laughed softly. I warned you I'm not like your world. Curtis shook his head gently, voice soft, and thank God for that. The hours after the revelation settled into a calm hum inside the hospital room. The adrenaline of birth had softened, the shock of Shirley's truth had eased, and a new warmth lingered in the spaces between them. Gentle, steady, undeniable. Curtis pulled his chair closer to Shirley's bed, refusing to drift far from her or Viola. He wasn't intrusive. He wasn't hovering. He simply existed near them, as if some instinct tugged him to stay anchored to the two people who had just redefined his life. Shirley rested, her body exhausted, but her spirit at peace. She watched Curtis through half-lidded eyes, the way he leaned forward to study Viola as though memorizing every detail, the way he checked on Shirley without making her feel overwhelmed, the way he tried not to show how emotional he still felt. He had cried earlier, not loudly, not in a way that drew attention, but tears had slipped out when he held Viola. Shirley noticed, and it softened something deep in her chest. Curtis Crane wasn't the cold corporate man she had expected. Beneath the expensive suits and controlled demeanor lived someone capable of deep sentiment, someone who felt wholeheartedly once he allowed himself to. She admired that more than she wanted to admit. Curtis stood and walked over to the bassinet again. He touched the railing lightly, watching his daughter sleep. "She looks so peaceful," he whispered. "She likes your voice," Shirley replied. "She kept settling when you talked." Curtis looked over at her, surprised. "You noticed that?" "Of course I did," Shirley said with a small smile. "You calm her." Curtis let out a breath. Slow, warm, grateful. "I want to be good at this. At being her father." "You already are," Shirley said. No hesitation, no doubt, just truth. Curtis's throat tightened. He pulled a tissue from his pocket and discreetly wiped his eyes. "You shouldn't say things like that," he murmured. "Why not?" Because I don't know how to take it," he confessed. Shirley tilted her head. "My daddy always said when someone tells you the truth about your goodness, you say thank you and accept it." Curtis laughed softly. "Your daddy is a wise man. He is—" Curtis looked at her for a long moment. Something unspoken, something he wasn't sure he should examine yet, passed through the air between them. "You know," he began, slower this time, "I can't stop thinking about what you said earlier, that this was my first pregnancy." He nodded. "Yes, that. All of it. Everything it implied." Shirley adjusted her blanket. "I didn't mean to shock you." "You didn't shock me," he corrected gently. "You humbled me." Shirley blinked. "Humbled? You?" Curtis sat back down, leaning toward her. "Shirley, you stepped into something brand new, with no experience, no past reference, and you walked through it with more courage than most people show in their entire lives." Shirley's voice softened. "Curtis, no, let me say this," he insisted quietly. "You gave me a daughter without asking anything of me, without expecting applause, without fear. You walked into this journey because you believed in the purpose, not the reward." Shirley didn't speak. She simply listened, fully, deeply, giving him space to finish. Curtis swallowed. "And I realized tonight that you're stronger than anyone I've ever known." Shirley's fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. She didn't blush. She didn't deflect the compliment. She simply held the moment, the sincerity, the weight of his words. "Thank you," she whispered. Curtis nodded, grateful that she understood him. A nurse entered with a notebook and pen. "Would you like to record the time and details of the birth for your keepsake file?" She handed the notebook to Curtis. He froze. "Me?" he asked. Curtis looked at Shirley, almost seeking permission. She nodded gently. "You're her father," she reminded him. He sat at the small table by the window, the notebook open in front of him. He held the pen carefully, almost too carefully, like he didn't want to mark the page incorrectly. Date, time, weight, length, baby's name, father's name, mother's name. He filled the spaces slowly, deliberately, absorbing each word as if it were sacred. When he reached Shirley's name, his hand paused only for a second. Then he wrote it. Neat, precise, respectful. He didn't hand the notebook back right away. Instead, he brought it to Shirley and placed it gently on her lap. "Does everything look right?" he asked. Shirley read it, smiling when she saw how carefully he had written every detail. "It looks perfect," she said. Curtis exhaled in relief and took his seat again. The nurse returned, took the notebook, and left them alone once more. It was then, in the quiet, that Curtis felt something shift. He looked at Shirley's tired but glowing face, at the baby who had come into the world through both of them, even if not in the traditional way, at the room filled with gentle sounds of new life, and a thought landed inside him with calm certainty. He didn't want Shirley to fade from his life after this, not as a memory, not as a chapter, not as a contract fulfilled. He wanted her present, connected, part of Viola's world, part of his world. He didn't say it aloud, not yet, but the truth had already taken root. Shirley had spent months seeing Curtis as a client, then as a partner in the journey, then as a friend, who felt openly, who wanted to do right, even when he wasn't sure how. She watched him keep checking on her, adjusting her blanket, glancing at her to make sure she was breathing comfortably. She watched him stand each time the nurse entered, listening attentively. She watched him hold Viola with tenderness she hadn't expected. and something inside her softened in a way she didn't know how to describe. Curtis wasn't just a billionaire with polished manners and expensive habits. He was good. Not perfect, but genuinely good. The kind of good that made her wonder what life around him might look like. The kind of good that made her chest warm. The kind of good that planted a seed she hadn't planned for. She shifted gently and said, "Curtis?" He turned to her immediately. "Yes, you're going to be a wonderful father." Curtis's breath caught, the compliment hitting him harder than he expected. "Thank you," he said, voice low. She gave a small nod. "I mean it." Their eyes lingered on each other a little too long, warm, searching, soft. Not a romantic leap, just the beginning of something growing quietly between them. Later in the night, the nurse dimmed the lights further, creating a soothing glow around the room. Viola slept peacefully. Shirley's breathing slowed. Curtis remained awake beside her, not ready to leave. At one point, Shirley shifted in discomfort. Curtis stood instantly. "Do you need anything?" "No, just adjusting." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." And when he did, her fingers brushed his. They both froze. Neither pulled away. The touch was small, accidental at first, but then intentional. Shirley's eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze. "You're here," she whispered. "Of course I'm here." There was something in his voice, a depth she hadn't heard before, something that wrapped around the simple words and turned them into something else. His hand remained resting lightly atop hers. Neither of them spoke again for several minutes. They didn't need to. The silence carried everything unspoken. Trust, gratitude, a new beginning forming quietly in the dark. As dawn crept up behind the hospital blinds, Curtis still hadn't left. He stayed through nurse rotations, through midnight checkups, through moments when Shirley dozed off and moments when Viola stirred. He stayed because he wanted to. He stayed because something had changed in him. He stayed because the bond between them, once defined by a contract, had grown into something far more meaningful. Shirley woke to see him watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. But it wasn't unreadable. It was gentle, warm, unexpectedly affectionate. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she whispered back. In that quiet exchange, something settled, a new understanding, a new connection, a new thread pulling their lives closer together. Neither of them said it aloud, but both felt it. This wasn't temporary anymore. This was the beginning of something bigger, something neither had prepared for, but both were finally ready to feel. The weeks after Viola's birth brought a new rhythm to Shirley's life, one that required a balance she had never experienced before. Returning to her classroom meant long mornings teaching multiplication tables, reading stories aloud, and helping her students navigate friendship disputes. Yet each afternoon carried a gentle pull toward the small family she and Curtis had formed almost without realizing it. Her visits to Curtis's home became routine, not because of obligation, but because of instinct. Even after the surrogacy ended, she couldn't imagine detaching herself from the baby she had carried. Curtis had made it clear she never had to. Curtis's house transformed quickly once Viola entered his life. His formerly sleek office now had a cushioned rocking chair in one corner, baby toys scattered near the bookshelf, and a soft pink blanket draped over his desk chair. His assistant laughed one morning when she found a burp cloth beside his laptop. "Rough night?" she teased. Curtis only smiled. Worth it. He had never imagined he would memorize the exact pitch of his daughter's cries, or the way her breathing changed just before she drifted off to sleep. But he did. Every detail was etched into him. One evening, Shirley arrived after school to find Curtis crouched on the living room floor assembling a crib. "Is that the instruction manual?" she asked. Curtis stared at the scattered screws. Somewhere in this chaos, Shirley dropped her bag and knelt beside him. Scoot over. Together, they pieced the crib together, Curtis reading the steps while Shirley organized the screws and held pieces in place. They laughed when one part didn't fit, then laughed harder when Curtis insisted it was the manufacturer's fault. "It's definitely user error," Shirley teased. "You're enjoying this way too much." "I am." Eventually, the crib stood proudly in the corner of the nursery. Curtis looked at it with the kind of satisfaction most men reserve for sports trophies. Shirley leaned over the side, smoothing the fresh bedding with care. "She's going to sleep well in here," she whispered. Curtis nodded. "Thanks to you." Shirley turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just the quiet comfort of two people working in sync. Their dinners were never planned, but somehow they happened often. Shirley would stop by after work, and Curtis would be in the kitchen chopping vegetables or heating something from a local restaurant. Shirley teased him about learning to season food properly. Curtis teased her about her teacher voice whenever she corrected him. One night, Viola rested in a baby seat on the table while Shirley graded papers and Curtis cooked spaghetti. Curtis glanced at her stack of assignments. "Do you ever rest?" "Not when my kids write essays like this," she said, holding one up. "This child wrote 3 paragraphs about why pizza should be declared a national treasure." Curtis snorted. "He's not wrong." Shirley shook her head, laughing. The sound filled the kitchen with a warmth Curtis had never known at home. As dinner finished, Viola woke and began fussing. Shirley picked her up instantly, bouncing her gently. "I'll take her," Curtis said. "You sure?" "Yes." He held his arms out, and Shirley placed Viola against his chest. Curtis walked around the kitchen, humming low and steady until his daughter settled. Shirley watched him, her grading forgotten. "You're really good at that," she said. Curtis didn't turn around, but he smiled. "She makes it easy." Shirley felt something shift in her chest. Admiration, yes, but also something gentler. Something she wasn't ready to name. Not everything was seamless. There were moments of miscommunication, tiny things but meaningful, like when Curtis bought 3 different brands of diapers trying to determine which one Viola preferred. "Curtis, babies don't choose brands," Shirley said through laughter. "You never know," he replied seriously. She might have standards, or when Shirley insisted on teaching him how to swaddle correctly. "That looks like origami," Curtis complained. "It's not origami, it's parenting." They argued lightly about sleep schedules, debated breast milk versus formula, and disagreed on how warm the nursery should be. But these challenges never turned into conflict. Each misunderstanding became a reason to talk, adjust, and grow into the role neither of them had originally expected, partners in raising a child they loved. One evening, Shirley arrived late, tired from a long school day. Curtis opened the door and saw the fatigue in her posture. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Just a long day. Kids were restless." Curtis stepped aside. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." Shirley walked to the couch and sat down heavily. Curtis brought her a glass of water without being asked. She thanked him softly. "Want to talk about it?" he asked. Shirley shook her head. "Not really, but thank you." Curtis sat beside her, not too close but closer than before. Viola slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby. Shirley leaned her head back, eyes closing for a moment. "You can rest," Curtis murmured. She opened her eyes slightly. "I don't want to fall asleep on your couch." "You can," he said gently. "I'll wake you when dinner's ready." Shirley searched his eyes, looking for judgment, obligation, or discomfort. She found none. What she found instead was care, real, unmistakable care. "Thank you, Curtis," she whispered. He nodded once, steady. Shirley allowed herself to relax, just for a moment, just enough to feel safe. As she rested, Curtis watched her with quiet admiration, not romantic longing, not unspoken desire, but deep respect for the woman who had stepped into his life with grace, strength, and honesty. He didn't say it out loud, but the truth settled within him. He couldn't imagine raising Viola without Shirley beside him, and he wasn't sure when that had become true. Only that it was. One night after Shirley left, Curtis walked back into the nursery. Viola slept peacefully, her tiny fist curled near her cheek. He rested a gentle hand on the crib rail. "I hope you always know how much she means to you," he whispered. For the first time, truly, he allowed himself to acknowledge that his life didn't just expand when Viola was born. It deepened. And Shirley was part of that depth. He wasn't ready to name what they were becoming. Shirley wasn't ready either. But the truth was simple. They were learning to co-parent, and learning to love each other in quiet, patient ways neither had expected. The merging of their lives didn't happen suddenly. It wasn't dramatic or forced. Instead, it unfolded in quiet choices, invitations extended without hesitation, shared routines becoming natural, and moments that gently pulled their worlds closer until the lines between them blurred in a way that felt intentional. Curtis had once believed that his world and Shirley's world existed in different universes, parallel but distant. But now, he found himself stepping into spaces he'd never imagined, while Shirley walked confidently into places she once assumed were reserved for people who lived lives unlike her own. And Viola, tiny and bright, rested between them like a warm thread weaving two fabrics into one. Shirley's community embraced Viola before she was even old enough to speak. Everyone knew the baby as our little blessing, and every gathering ended with several hands reaching out to hold her, rock her, or admire the way she kicked her legs with excitement. One particularly warm Saturday evening, Shirley carried Viola into her cousin's backyard where a cookout was already underway. The air smelled of grilled chicken, sweet corn, and homemade sauce. Laughter rose from every corner of the yard as children darted between chairs and adults settled into small conversational circles. "Shirley, there she is!" someone called out. "Bring that baby over here." People flocked toward her immediately, cooing and smiling at Viola. Curtis arrived a few minutes later, parking his car carefully along the street before walking into the backyard. He wore a simple polo shirt and jeans, no designer labels, no glossy shoes, nothing that screamed billionaire. Shirley had once told him gently, "Just come as yourself." And he did. When he stepped through the gate, several heads turned. Despite this being far from his usual environment, Curtis offered a polite smile, greeting people by name when he could remember. Shirley approached him with Viola in her arms. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it," he replied. Her father came over, wiping his hands on a towel. "Curtis, glad you're here. We've got plenty of food. Eat before the kids devour everything." Curtis laughed. "I'll take your advice." Shirley handed him Viola. "Your turn," she teased. He accepted the baby with confidence he didn't have a few months ago. Viola gurgled happily, pressing her cheek into his chest. Shirley watched them with soft eyes. Curtis walked over to the grill area where some of the older men stood. They welcomed him warmly, offering food before peppering him with friendly questions. "You ever played horseshoes?" one man asked. Curtis shook his head. "I can't say I have." "Well," the man said, clapping him on the back, "tonight's as good a time as any." Shirley laughed when she saw Curtis attempting to learn the game. He was terrible at it, missing the post completely, once even tossing the horseshoe too short, but instead of growing frustrated or embarrassed, he laughed with everyone else, holding Viola securely in one arm as he tried again. Shirley joined him after a while. "You're improving," she teased. "No, I'm not," he said honestly, "but your dad said the goal is to have fun, which I'm achieving." Shirley smiled at him. "You fit here more than you think." Curtis glanced around the yard, the lights hanging between the trees, the sound of gospel music playing from the porch, the children running barefoot across the grass. "I like it here," he admitted. "It feels real." Shirley nodded. "It is." Later that night, as fireflies began to appear, Shirley held Viola on her lap and pointed them out gently. "Look at that, sweetheart. See the little lights?" Curtis sat beside her, knee brushing hers lightly. Not intentional, but not accidental either. Viola reached out with her tiny hands, fascinated by the glowing insects dancing above the grass. Shirley looked at Curtis. "You ever seen fireflies this close?" "Not like this," he whispered. Shirley shifted slightly closer. "Welcome to Oklahoma's summers." Curtis felt the warmth of the moment settle deep inside his chest. This wasn't just her world anymore. It was theirs. One Wednesday evening, Shirley invited Curtis and Viola to choir practice at her church. Curtis sat in the second pew with Viola resting in his arms while the choir rehearsed. Shirley stood with the altos, singing with her soulful, steady voice. Curtis watched her, not staring, not admiring her like one admires something distant, but observing with a kind of quiet pride. She belonged here, surrounded by people who loved her and knew her history. Viola dozed off in his arms, soothed by the melodies filling the sanctuary. Curtis held her close, adjusting her blanket carefully. During a break, Shirley walked down to him. "Are you bored?" "No," he said instantly. "Your voice is beautiful." Shirley blinked, surprised by the direct compliment. "Thank you." He looked down at Viola. "She likes hearing you sing." Shirley smiled, touching Viola's cheek. "I sang to her through the whole pregnancy. Maybe she remembers." Curtis looked at Shirley again, really looked at her, and something in his chest tightened gently. The feeling wasn't overwhelming, but it was present, undeniable. He wasn't ready to name it, but it frightened him in a warm, unfamiliar way. Shirley had always assumed corporate events were stiff and uncomfortable, but she went anyway when Curtis invited her. The first was a charity luncheon where business leaders gathered to discuss educational programs for underserved communities. Curtis didn't bring her as a prop. He didn't hide her, and he didn't minimize her role. He introduced her confidently. "This is Shirley. She's the mother of my daughter." Some people looked surprised. Others smiled respectfully. But Curtis never wavered. He stood by Shirley as if she belonged beside him, because to him, she did. During the luncheon, Shirley asked thoughtful questions, shared insight from her years teaching, and offered ideas to improve student engagement. Curtis listened with admiration as others nodded along. At one point, he leaned toward her and whispered, "You're brilliant." She flushed lightly. "I'm a teacher. We learn to improvise." Curtis shook his head. "No, you understand people. That's rare." Shirley glanced at him, noticing the sincerity in his tone. She didn't reply. Not because she disagreed, but because she wasn't used to being seen so clearly. After the event, Curtis carried Viola to the car while Shirley walked beside him. "You did great," he said. "That was new for me," she confessed. "I wasn't sure how to act." "You acted like yourself," he replied. "That's why you stood out." Shirley looked at him again. The admiration in his eyes wasn't romantic. It was deeper, respect that had grown from months of shared experiences. She exhaled softly. "Thank you, Curtis." He unlocked the car, then paused, standing very still as he looked at her. "You belong in my world," he said quietly. "Even if you don't think you do." Her breath caught. She didn't know how to respond. Not yet. The transition from two people raising a baby to something like a family was gradual, so gradual that neither noticed it happening. But it happened in the small things, like how Curtis kept a blanket in his car for Shirley because she always got cold in the evenings, or how Shirley stocked baby lotion at her house, the brand Curtis preferred, for days when he dropped Viola off. Or how Curtis learned Shirley's schedule well enough to bring dinner on nights she stayed late grading papers. Or how Shirley began teaching him the small habits of her upbringing, thanking people with words instead of gifts, praying before big decisions, celebrating simple moments instead of waiting for big ones. They slipped into a rhythm that felt natural, almost inevitable. People in Shirley's community began calling Curtis family. People in Curtis's professional circle began recognizing Shirley as someone important. But neither of them chose to define anything out loud. There was no confession, no awkward conversation, no rushed emotions. They simply existed beside each other in a way that felt right, even if neither admitted it yet. One evening, Shirley placed Viola in Curtis's arms before heading home. "Text me when she settles," she said softly. Their hands brushed, just lightly, but instead of pulling away, both paused. Curtis looked at her, the question forming behind his eyes but not spoken. Shirley looked back, the warmth of unspoken understanding rising slowly. They simply let it linger, warm, steady, gentle, the beginning of something that frightened them both in the best possible way. They were becoming a family, before either dared to say the word. Curtis never forgot the night Shirley handed him Viola and said softly, "Text me when she settles." It replayed in his mind far longer than he wanted to admit. The quiet warmth in her eyes, the gentle confidence in her voice, the soft brush of her hand against his, all of it lingered. He tried ignoring it, burying himself in meetings, reports, and planning for upcoming expansions. But no matter how many contracts he signed or calls he finished, his thoughts drifted back to Shirley, her steadiness, her laughter, the way she carried love for her community with ease, the way Viola's world felt bigger because Shirley was in it. Curtis Crane, who once feared emotional vulnerability more than financial failure, now found himself confused by his own heart. It started on a calm, late summer night. Shirley had stayed behind after choir practice, attending a brief meeting about an upcoming youth program. Curtis brought Viola home with him, fed her, changed her, and rocked her to sleep with a gentleness he never knew he had in him. By the time Shirley texted, "Heading to your place," be there in 20, Viola was asleep on his chest. Curtis didn't move her. He simply sat in the rocking chair in his dimly lit living room, heart beating to an unfamiliar rhythm. He didn't know how to name it, or if he should. Shirley arrived quietly, letting herself in with a spare key Curtis had given her a few weeks earlier. A key. He gave her a key without hesitation. Neither of them commented on it at the time, but tonight, seeing her walk in naturally, as if she belonged there, made something inside him tighten. Shirley smiled softly when she saw Viola curled against his chest. "You're getting good at that," she whispered. Curtis smiled back. "She likes listening to my heartbeat." Shirley eased into the seat beside him, close enough that their knees almost touched. "She did the same with me during pregnancy. Anytime I laid down, she settled when she heard it." Curtis glanced at her. "She trusts you." Shirley met his eyes for a moment, then lowered hers shyly. "She trusts you too." A quiet calm settled between them. No noise, no tension, just presence. Shirley finally rose and gently lifted Viola from his chest. "Let's put her in the crib." Curtis watched her walk down the hallway, swaying slightly as she held the baby with practiced ease. When she returned, she stood in the doorway for a moment. "You tired?" she asked. "Not really," he replied. Shirley nodded toward the porch. "Want to sit outside? It's nice tonight." Curtis hesitated only a second. "Yeah, I'd like that." The backyard was still, the air warm, the sound of distant crickets underscored the evening, and gentle porch lights cast a soft glow across the wooden boards beneath their feet. Shirley sat on the porch swing, and Curtis joined her. The swing rocked lightly under their combined weight. For a long moment neither spoke. Shirley finally exhaled, a soft release of breath. "You ever realize life turns into something you weren't expecting?" Curtis gave a half smile. "Every day since I met you." Shirley turned to him, startled. "Since me?" He nodded slowly. "You changed my life, Shirley." She looked away, overwhelmed but quiet. Curtis continued, voice low and honest. "Before all of this, before Viola, I lived in routine. I knew my schedule, my goals, my deadlines. Everything was predictable, efficient, safe." Shirley smiled faintly. "Safe can be lonely." "It was," he admitted, "but I didn't realize how lonely until you stepped into my life. You brought color into my days. You brought warmth. You brought something I didn't know I needed." Shirley swallowed hard. "Curtis," he shook his head gently. "Let me finish." She nodded. "You brought community into my world," he said quietly. "Your family welcomed me like I belonged. Your church embraced Viola with love. Your cousins treat me like I'm just another guy trying to learn horseshoes." He chuckled softly. "I've never experienced that kind of openness before." Shirley looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "We try to lead with love. My community, my family. We believe everyone deserves a place to be seen." Curtis breathed out slowly. "You made me feel seen." Her heart thumped, hard. He turned toward her fully now, expression sincere and vulnerable, a side of him few people had ever witnessed, a side he rarely allowed himself to expose. "Shirley," he whispered, "I don't think I've ever respected anyone as much as I respect you." Her breath caught. Curtis rarely spoke so emotionally. When he did, it carried weight. "I've watched you teach with passion, carry Viola with grace, handle challenges with kindness. You walk through life with strength and humility and purpose, and somehow, you still manage to laugh. You still make space for joy." Shirley blinked back unexpected tears. Curtis reached out without thinking, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Do you know how incredible that is?" Shirley stared at his hand touching hers. "Curtis, why are you saying all this?" He leaned in closer, heartbeat roaring in his ears, because for weeks he had been falling for her in ways he never planned. "I'm saying it," he whispered, "because you've become someone important to me. More important than I know how to explain." Shirley exhaled shakily. "Curtis." He looked into her eyes, deep, steady, unsure but honest. "Shirley, He stopped. The next words caught on the edge of his breath like they were too big, too heavy, too dangerous to release. Because the moment he said them, everything would change. Their arrangement, their co-parenting rhythm, their fragile, beautiful balance. And he couldn't risk losing what they had built. Not now, not when it was the most meaningful connection he had ever experienced. Shirley waited, eyes searching his. But Curtis broke the gaze. He looked down, swallowing hard. "I care about you," he said instead. Softer, safer, controlled. The words were true but incomplete. Shirley's chest tightened. She had felt the shift. She had seen the emotion in his eyes. She knew there was more he wanted to say. But she also saw fear of breaking what they had, fear of mixing emotions into a bond already filled with tenderness. So she nodded slowly, giving him the space he didn't know how to ask for. "I care about you too, Curtis," she whispered. They sat in the stillness, their hands still touching, not clasped, not held, but touching gently, quietly, as if both were afraid to pull away, but equally afraid to take the next step. The porch swing rocked softly. A warm breeze brushed past them. Neither spoke again, but the moment said everything. They were no longer just partners in parenthood. They were becoming something else, not defined, not labeled, but undeniably real. Curtis stared ahead into the night, feeling both relief and regret. He had come close, so close, to saying what lived in his heart. But not yet, not tonight, not until he was sure he wouldn't lose her. Shirley leaned back, looking up at the sky as she breathed deeply. Her heart was tender, hopeful, and guarded all at once. Inside the house, Viola stirred faintly, a small sound that drifted onto the porch. Shirley and Curtis both looked toward the doorway. Then they looked at each other, and for the first time neither needed words to understand. They were already a family. They just hadn't admitted it out loud. The house had settled into a rare stillness by the time Curtis and Shirley stepped back inside. The porch swing's gentle rhythm lingered behind them, the soft creak echoing like a memory that refused to fade. Curtis quietly closed the screen door, careful not to let it snap shut. Shirley walked ahead of him, her steps light, almost hesitant, as though part of her didn't want the moment outside to end. Down the hallway, Viola's faint murmurs drifted through the cracked nursery door. Shirley paused there, hand resting on the frame as she peered inside. Curtis stood beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing his arm. "She's dreaming," Shirley whispered. Curtis nodded. "She always looks peaceful after you sing to her." Shirley smiled softly. "She feels safe." Curtis swallowed. "Because of you." Shirley didn't reply immediately. Instead, she watched the slow rise and fall of Viola's small chest, the baby blanket rising gently with each breath. Violating the quiet felt disrespectful somehow, like interrupting something sacred. Curtis finally stepped back, motioning toward the living room. "Come sit with me for a moment?" Shirley nodded. "Sure." They returned to the couch they had spent many late nights on, sometimes talking, sometimes laughing, sometimes exhausted from new parent tasks they had never expected to handle together. Tonight, though, the atmosphere felt heavier, not uncomfortable, just charged with truth neither of them had spoken aloud. Shirley sat at one end of the couch, curling her legs beneath her. Curtis took the opposite end but angled his body toward her, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. For a long minute, neither said a word. Curtis broke the silence first. "Shirley," he said, voice low, "I keep thinking about everything you've done for me, for Viola, for us." Shirley tilted her head, studying him gently. "Curtis, you don't have to thank me every time. I chose this. I'm grateful I could help." "No," he said softly, shaking his head. "You didn't just help. You carried her. You gave her the safest home she could have had before she was even born. You guided me when I didn't know what I was doing. You never made me feel like a burden, even when I was stressed or confused or scared." Shirley blinked, surprised at the vulnerability in his tone. Curtis wasn't a man who shared feelings casually. His emotional guard was strong, built from corporate expectations and years of protecting himself from criticism and disappointment. But tonight, that guard lowered, allowing her to glimpse the weight he carried. "You were never a burden," she whispered. Curtis looked up, meeting her eyes fully. "Maybe not to you, but to myself." He exhaled sharply, as if admitting something long denied. "I spent years thinking I needed to be perfect to deserve certain things. A family, love, peace. I thought my value was tied to what I could build, what I could buy, what I could accomplish." Shirley's expression softened. "But then you walked into my life," he continued, voice steadying, "and suddenly things didn't feel so complicated. You made parenthood feel human, not technical, not clinical. You made it feel like something rooted in heart, not expectation." Shirley pressed her lips together, touched. Curtis, he shook his head again, gently. Let me finish, please. She nodded. You helped me become a father long before Viola ever arrived. You asked me questions no one else cared to ask. You taught me patience. You showed me what real community looks like. You helped me see my life outside meetings and numbers. His voice thickened slightly. You gave me something I never thought I would have. Shirley looked down at her hands. Her heart thudded softly in her chest. She didn't want to misinterpret anything, didn't want to assume too much, but she couldn't deny the warmth blossoming within her. Curtis, she murmured, you're giving me too much credit. No, he replied gently. I'm not giving you enough. Just full of emotion neither knew how to handle. Shirley shifted on the couch, slowly uncurling her legs. She turned toward him slightly, eyes brave but uncertain. Curtis, why are you telling me all this tonight? He inhaled deeply, because he was tired of holding it inside. Because her presence had become the brightest part of his days. Because he didn't want her to ever wonder how much she mattered. But fear still pulled at him. Fear of risking what they had built. Fear of moving too fast. Fear of shifting the balance that had given them stability. So instead of saying everything, he said only what he could manage without breaking. Because I needed you to know. His voice wavered gently. That I'm grateful for you. For everything you are. Everything you've done. Shirley's lips parted. The sincerity in his words filled her with warmth she hadn't expected. Curtis, I'm grateful for you too. Curtis felt something in him relax, a quiet exhale of relief. He hadn't confessed everything, but he had confessed enough. He leaned back slightly, and Shirley moved a little closer without thinking. Their proximity felt natural now, not forced. And then, quietly, slowly, their hands touched, not by accident. Not briefly, but softly, deliberately. Her fingers brushed his first feather light, like testing whether the moment was allowed. Curtis didn't pull away. He turned his palm upward, and Shirley's hand settled into his, small, warm, steady. The touch sent a gentle current through both of them, not overwhelming but undeniable. A connection formed in that single motion, deeper than any word either could have spoken. Neither spoke for a long while. The quiet of the house wrapped around them, broken only by the faint hum of the air vent and Viola's distant sleeping sounds. Curtis ran his thumb lightly over the back of Shirley's hand, a tiny movement, but telling. She didn't flinch. Instead, her grip tightened softly, reassuring him. Shirley, Curtis murmured. I don't know what we're becoming, he admitted in a whisper, but I know it's something important. Her breath caught. She slowly leaned her shoulder against his, drawing closer until their sides rested together. I know, she whispered. I feel it too. His heart pounded, not with panic, with clarity, but the confession stayed trapped in his chest. He wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, he squeezed her hand slightly. Shirley exhaled, calm and warm. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Curtis gently tilted his head so it touched hers. Their hands remained intertwined. Their bodies leaned toward each other with quiet certainty. Their hearts beat in a rhythm neither could ignore. They didn't kiss, they didn't name it, they didn't rush the moment, but everything in the silence said, "We are already more than we admit." Curtis closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself to breathe in the closeness. Shirley whispered, "Curtis, yes, thank you, for letting me be part of your life." Curtis turned slightly, his forehead brushing lightly against the side of her hair. "You are more than part of my life," he whispered back. "You're central to it." Shirley didn't move, didn't question. She simply let the words settle. Curtis opened his eyes slowly, staring ahead into the dim room, realizing fully, deeply, completely that he wasn't afraid of loving her. He was afraid of losing her. But Shirley didn't move away. She stayed, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, heart quietly answering his. And for the first time in his adult life, Curtis felt something rare, something gentle and hopeful. He wasn't alone anymore. And it was because of her. Curtis had always believed that gratitude was expressed through action, showing up, being responsible, doing things well. But after that porch conversation, gratitude no longer felt like enough. Every time he replayed Shirley's quiet "I feel it too," something inside him shifted. He, didn't want to stand at a distance anymore. He wanted to be present, not out of obligation, not out of co-parenting necessity, but because he genuinely wanted to walk beside her. So he started showing up in ways that surprised even her. It was a warm Sunday afternoon when Shirley hosted a small reading event for local children at the community center. She had mentioned it casually earlier in the week. Nothing major, just a small gathering, she'd said, something she organized for fun to get kids excited about books. Curtis hadn't been specifically invited. The event had nothing to do with him or Viola, but he drove to the community center anyway, carrying a box of children's books he bought that morning. When Shirley spotted him standing in the doorway, she froze mid-sentence. He smiled. I heard a certain teacher needed backup. Her eyes widened. Curtis, you didn't have to come. I know, he replied, stepping inside. I wanted to. It wasn't said with fanfare. No grand gesture, no dramatic tone. Just a warm truth that settled between them with surprising weight. Shirley blinked, a little stunned. Are those books? Yes, he answered, holding up the box. You mentioned the center didn't have enough for every child to take home. So, I grabbed a few. A few? Shirley opened the box and gasped. Curtis, this is a whole library. He shrugged lightly. Kids deserve options. She laughed softly, a sound that melted something inside him. Well, thank you. Curtis helped set up the tables, arrange the books, and greet parents. Shirley watched him as he knelt to speak to one of the children at eye level, letting the girl pick a storybook decorated with bright cartoon bears. Do you like animals? Curtis asked the girl gently. The girl nodded shyly. Good choice, he said, smiling. Shirley felt a warm flutter in her chest. This wasn't the corporate version of Curtis. This wasn't the billionaire who attended galas or negotiated million-dollar contracts. This was simply a man offering kindness without agenda, without trying to impress anyone. A man who came because she had mentioned something that mattered to her. A man who wanted to understand her world. Shirley walked over to him when the children ran off to their reading mats. You're a natural with kids. Curtis looked at her with a quiet sincerity. I'm learning from the best. Her heart skipped. He meant it. Later that afternoon, when the event ended, Shirley invited Curtis to her cousin's house again. Not for a cookout. This time for a Sunday family dinner. You're part of Viola's life, she told him softly. You're welcome. Curtis hesitated only a second before nodding. I'll follow you. As they stepped inside the house, Curtis was welcomed with warm greetings, yet he still felt out of place, not unwelcome, but aware that he was entering a world that was built long before he arrived. Shirley noticed the slight stiffness in his posture and gently nudged him. You're fine, she whispered. Relax. He exhaled slowly. Working on it. At dinner, Shirley's family passed dishes he couldn't pronounce. Greens seasoned perfectly, macaroni and cheese baked until golden cornbread that tasted nothing like the version he'd tried at upscale restaurants. You okay over there? Shirley asked, smirking as he tried to discreetly figure out what he was eating. Curtis whispered, What is this? Smoked turkey greens? And this? Candied yams? And this one? Don't mess with Auntie's mac and cheese, Shirley warned playfully. Shirley leaned closer to him, voice low. Just eat. Trust me. He took a bite, paused, then nodded slowly. Okay, this is incredible. Shirley grinned. Across the table, her relatives exchanged knowing looks. Curtis wasn't just present. He was attentive, respectful, and genuinely trying. Halfway through dinner, Shirley's uncle asked, So, Curtis, what made you come out today? Curtis glanced at Shirley before answering. I wanted to support something important to her. The room quieted. Shirley's eyes widened slightly. Shirley's cousin whispered dramatically, Oh, he said her. Shirley pinched the bridge of her nose. Ignore them. Curtis chuckled. No worries. But when Shirley looked at him again, she noticed it. The softness in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, the way he wasn't hiding behind formal speeches or business confidence. Humility, joy, warmth. He wasn't performing. He was simply showing up. And that, more than anything, reached her heart. After dinner, Shirley walked him to his car while the sun set behind them, casting the sky in shades of gold and deepening blue. She held Viola in her arms, the baby babbling contentedly as Curtis opened the car door. That was intense, Curtis said with a gentle laugh. Shirley smiled. My family is a lot, huh? They're amazing, Curtis said honestly. They're loud, they're funny, they're welcoming. Shirley adjusted Viola on her hip. They like you. Curtis looked at her with a slight tilt of his head. Do you? Shirley blinked, startled by the directness. Curtis swallowed nervously. I mean, do you like having me around? Shirley's voice softened. Yes, Curtis, I do. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Good. Their eyes lingered on each other. Then Viola reached out unexpectedly, tiny hands grabbing Curtis's shirt and pulling him closer toward Shirley. Shirley laughed. She wants her daddy. Curtis gently held Viola's hands. She always knows how to ruin or fix a moment. Shirley's eyebrows lifted. Which one is this? Curtis's smile faltered, replaced by something more serious, something deeper. Maybe both, he murmured. They stood close now, so close that the warmth of the moment wrapped around them quietly. Curtis stepped forward, reaching out to brush a curl from Shirley's forehead. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but the touch sent a gentle tremor through her. Shirley, he whispered. She swallowed. Yes? I didn't come today for Viola. She stilled. Curtis's voice dropped even lower. I came because of you. Her breath caught. He moved closer, not touching, not rushing, not demanding anything, just standing near enough that she felt the sincerity in his presence. You matter to me, he said quietly. Not because of the contract, not because of responsibility, but because being around you feels right. Shirley's grip tightened around Viola. The child rested her head on Shirley's shoulder, unaware of the shift happening between her parents. And I don't know where this is heading, Curtis admitted, but I know I want to keep walking there with you. Shirley felt her heart open, slowly, carefully. She didn't step back. She didn't hide behind politeness or uncertainty. She simply breathed in the truth of his words. For the first time, the future didn't scare her. For the first time, her heart let hope in. I want that too, she said softly. Curtis closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by relief. When he opened them again, his gaze was warm, steady, and full of something neither of them dared to name yet. But it was there, and it was real. Curtis lifted Viola gently into her car seat but paused before shutting the door. He turned back to Shirley. We're different, he said quietly. Different backgrounds, different experiences, but when I'm with you, I feel like myself. Not the CEO, not the son of a wealthy family, just Curtis. Shirley looked into his eyes and replied, and that's the version I like. Curtis's lips parted, not in shock but in understanding. He stepped forward again, close enough that their breath mingled in the warm Oklahoma night. He lifted his hand and let it rest lightly over hers. No rush, no pressure, no dramatic gesture, just a simple, grounded acknowledgement of what they were slowly becoming. Shirley squeezed his hand once. Curtis returned the squeeze. It was their quiet promise. We're not running from this anymore. And for the first time, Curtis didn't fear the weight of that truth. He welcomed it. The night sky stretched across Oklahoma like a blanket of soft light and quiet promise as Shirley walked up the path toward her parents' home, Viola resting sleepily on her hip. Curtis followed a step behind, his hands in his pockets, not out of uncertainty this time, but out of reverence. Tonight carried weight. Tonight carried truth. Shirley's family had gathered again, but this time the energy was different, less celebratory, more intimate, more observant. Shirley had told them Curtis wanted to stop by, but she hadn't said what he planned to say, mostly because she didn't know herself. Curtis greeted everyone with that familiar mixture of humility and warmth he had grown into, the version of him that made people forget he had ever lived in a world of polished boardrooms and private jets. The version shaped not by wealth, but by connection. Shirley's mother welcomed him with a hug. Good to see you again, baby. Curtis smiled softly. Always good to be here. Dinner was relaxed, filled with conversation, light teasing, and Viola's delighted squeals as different relatives passed her back and forth. Curtis watched Shirley move through the room, laughing, comforting Viola, answering questions, and he wondered how he ever lived without this presence in his life. But tonight something tugged at him gently, insistently. The truth he had almost spoken but held back. The truth now ready to leave his chest. After dinner, Shirley stepped outside with Viola to rock her to sleep in the warm night air. Curtis followed quietly after a few minutes. He found her sitting on the porch swing, humming softly as Viola's eyelids fluttered. The gentle sway of the swing moved with her voice, slow and soothing. Curtis approached with quiet steps. "She's out already?" Shirley nodded. "Didn't take much. Long day for a little one." He smiled at Viola's small, peaceful face. "She always looks so safe with you." Shirley gazed down at her daughter. "She feels your love too, Curtis." That sentence hit him deeper than she knew. Shirley lifted Viola carefully, rose from the swing, and laid the baby in her portable bassinet inside the doorway. When she walked back out, the quiet between her and Curtis didn't carry tension. It carried clarity. She sat beside him again, this time closer than before. The porch swing rocked. The warm Oklahoma air settled around them. Fireflies danced over the yard like tiny declarations of joy. Finally, Curtis drew a breath he had been holding for far too long. "Shirley," he said softly. She turned to him, eyes open, steady. "I'm here." Curtis swallowed. His voice was clear, unshaking now. "I've been searching for the right moment to say this. But the truth is, no moment will ever feel perfect. It's just something I need you to hear." Shirley's heartbeat quickened. Curtis looked at her fully, not at her hands or her feet or the ground, but at her face, her eyes, her presence. "I didn't just gain a daughter in this journey." Shirley froze. Curtis continued, voice warmer, deeper. "I gained the woman who made me a father." Her breath caught in her throat. Every emotion she had been holding back swelled inside her. Fear, wonder, hope, tenderness. Curtis kept going. "You carried Viola, but you also carried me through some of the hardest moments of my life without even realizing it. You showed me how to breathe again. You showed me how to laugh again. You showed me in every little thing you do what real family feels like." Shirley's eyes shimmered, and somewhere along the way he said softly, "You became home to me." A tear fell from Shirley's cheek. Curtis reached for her hand and she gave it to him without hesitation. "You matter to me," he said, "not because of the contract, not because of obligation, but because your kindness reshaped my entire world." Shirley wiped her cheek, laughing faintly from emotion. "Curtis." He leaned closer, not touching her face, not rushing anything, simply making sure she understood the depth of his heart. "I don't know what our tomorrow looks like," he admitted, "but I know I want every tomorrow with you in it." Shirley inhaled sharply, not out of shock, but out of recognition. She had felt this growing for months. She had felt it in the late-night calls, the dinners, the quiet support, the shared parenting moments. She had lived this truth long before he finally spoke it. She placed her free hand over his. "Curtis," she whispered, "you didn't gain me because of a contract. You gained me because you showed me the kind of man you really are. A man who learns, a man who listens, a man who shows up. You became family long before you realized it." Curtis's eyes softened, glistening faintly. "And I'm not going anywhere," she added gently. "Not unless you ask me to." He shook his head, exhaling a breath that carried months of silent longing. "I would never ask you to leave." Shirley smiled, a soft, radiant smile that lit the entire porch. Their hands tightened together. The swing rocked. The stars above seemed to shimmer more brightly, as if the night itself was answering their unspoken promise. A few steps away, Viola stirred in her bassinet, cooing softly before settling again. Curtis glanced toward her and chuckled. "She always picks the right moment to remind us who's in charge." Shirley laughed too, wiping her cheek again. "She's the bridge between our worlds." Curtis nodded. "And the reason we can finally admit what we've become." Shirley leaned into him, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. They didn't kiss, not yet, but their closeness carried all the tenderness and clarity they needed. They weren't two separate worlds anymore. They weren't two people bound only by a contract. They weren't just co-parents figuring things out. They were a family. By choice, by love, by the journey they had walked through together, from strangers in a surrogacy office to partners in the most meaningful chapter of their lives. Curtis slid his arm gently around Shirley's back, drawing her closer. She rested her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had learned how to open again. "Under these stars," Curtis said quietly, "I want to build something real with you." Shirley closed her eyes, letting the words sink into her soul. "Under these stars," she whispered back, "I want that too." The final swing of the porch creaked softly. Inside the house, the warmth of Shirley's family waited, and under the vast Oklahoma sky, two hearts finally aligned, Without fear, without hesitation, without barriers, just truth, just love, just the future they were ready to walk into together. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories on Stories by Mr. Flex. Your support helps bring more uplifting tales to audiences everywhere.